All right, so now we're going to have our closing session, a reflective discussion, which is going to be led by Beth Bidlack. She is director of the Burke Library at Union Theological Seminary, which is part of Columbia University Libraries. She joined Columbia in 2013 after serving as collection assessment and analysis librarian at Dartmouth College Library. In addition to her MLS, she has a PhD in religious and theological studies and a master's in theological studies. And she's a member of the board and current president of American Theological Library Association. And at this time, I'd like to ask not only Beth to come up, but any of the remaining speakers or panelists, if you could come up as well and be a part of the discussion. Thanks.
So I'm going to go back to something Bob said this morning about, what was that, crackpot ideas? But I like the baking metaphor that we got started here. So these are half-baked ideas. That sounds better, with a little bit of special sauce in there. So I was reflecting on what I was going to talk about for a few minutes before we have an open discussion. And during the lunchtime, someone said, "I look forward to hearing you preach this afternoon." I'm not ordained. And someone else said, "No, I think it's that Beth's going to pastor us through the conversation." So I guess I was selected because of my background. So it's a good thing. I'm going to talk about how I think my background has formed me into the leader that I think I have become and am becoming. So my background in theological studies, I think, has helped me in a number of ways. And I started writing a few ways out on a piece of paper, and I stopped at 7, because 7 is a good number to stop at. It's a number of completion, so stop at 7. So first, my training is specifically in biblical studies. So as a small child, I was quite amazed at leaders as depicted in the biblical literature. And what struck me was that these people had major character flaws, right? I could relate to them. Yeah? They are crazy folks. And I spent many years writing on one crazy man, Ezekiel, and that should say it all. If you know anything about the book of Ezekiel, it's just darn crazy. I felt right at home. So even as a small child, I was impacted by theological studies and seeing models put forward. So even the imperfect human condition can provide leadership. Then when I got to seminary, I had to take these practical theology classes. Ooh. But I'll tell you, the concept of emotional intelligence, I use that every day in my work. So understanding my emotional level, understanding the emotional levels of others, and how to move people to an emotional level that can then be open to change. It's a very important lesson. Also, communication skills, something we worked on all the time in seminary, and something I value every day in my life as a director and also as a board president. We do something else in seminary, this weird thing called reflective practice. It sounds more complicated than it really is. You constantly reflect on your actions and your behaviors and their impact. So this is part of my problem. This comes very naturally to me, as some of you might know. I like to reflect. So when I do something, I think about, well, now what's that all about? What motivated me? So this aspect of reflective practice, I think, has informed my leadership. I have a high level of self-awareness thanks to some ordination requirements, such as heavy-duty psychological testing, and the constant discipline to be self-aware. And I think that is an important aspect of leadership. I'm constantly reframing things or trying to look at situations from different perspectives, and I think this is another representation of a level of self-awareness that one can have if one has been through seminary. We would hope they would have it. Integrative seminars were an important part of my theological education. It's where you take theory, all that stuff that you read about, and how does it relate to the real world? So theory and praxis is what makes up an integrative seminar. And I kind of think every day is an integrative seminar for me. And then there's those loaded theological terms that I've tried to reinterpret for myself. So things like hope, grace, exile, providence, evangelize. These are all loaded theological terms, but they have meaning, I think, in our library context. So if you can't talk about what your library does and does well, or evangelize, then you better go to seminary. You need to understand what grace can mean. Sometimes out of nowhere, something wonderful can happen, and you just seize the day and move along and say thank you very much, and don't question it. I've had a new understanding of the term exile. I won't say anything more at this point. I've worked in a variety of contexts and a variety of geographical locations. I'll say nothing more. So I think someone from a former institution is here, living in exile in the wilderness. Jane, you can ask a question later. And finally, I would say my training in research methods has been essential for my work. I was trained heavily in source critical and historical critical methods, and that means defining and solving problems. Does that sound relevant to leadership? Identifying and evaluating evidence. Using evidence to articulate arguments and to make decisions. All part of what I was trained as a biblical scholar. So I take my little seminary toolkit and I hit the road. And I found myself in situations where leadership opportunities are just there. And I seize the day and fill the gap. So as ATLA president, I'm leading the ATLA board in a strategic thinking process. And I think Elliot is gone, but he and I should talk more about this. So we, at our last board meeting, formulated a big, hairy, audacious goal, or a BHAG, a big, hairy, audacious goal. And in June, we're going to continue talking about that goal and writing out a vivid description, or what does an envisioned future look like if we were to obtain that goal. In my role on the board, I've also been thinking about how to move from individual leadership to collective leadership. So our board process is such that we deliberate and we try to come to one voice. We have 12 people, and where 12 or more are gathered, there are at least 13 opinions in the room. But we agree to disagree. And then we support whatever decision is made beyond the boardroom. So we never give the impression that we are a divided board. And finally, as a board member, I've been very concerned about how to identify and engage future leaders. So I've been doing a lot of research on voluntary associations. And associations are made up of members, and probably 60 to 80% of those members just want to belong to something. The same study cites that perhaps 15 to 20% of that group may want to do something, but it's a very small percent. This particular study cites 2 to 5% that want to be leaders. So the majority of people in a group just want to belong to that group. So how do you identify that 2 to 5%, and then how do you nurture them? So that's just some of my own personal reflections. And just to show that I have done my integrative seminar and have been reflecting properly throughout the day. This morning, Bob provided a very helpful overview, talked about leadership, mentorship, mastery, and mystery. And I was quite taken as a theologian, or wannabe theologian, on the importance of the mystery in his conversation. The importance of realizing that you're not always sure where you're going or where you're going to end up, but that having a strong community, you can face that mystery together. And Elliot introduced us to the concepts of competency trap and disagreement deficit. And again, that competency trap that he was talking about led me back to those crazy prophets and challenging the status quo. This is something that comes easier to some than others. So how to be a model of speaking truth to power is a common way it's expressed in seminary life. And the seminary that I work at does this very well, sometimes to its own detriment. And the disagreement deficit. How can I take the skills that I've learned in pastoral care and counseling class and in a hospital chaplaincy setting to challenge people in caring ways? Smiling, as Elliot said, but also I feel like it's a responsibility to disagree at times and to put forward other points of view. After that, we had a wonderful presentation that outlined a successful implementation of a multifaceted professional development program. And this challenged us to think about ourselves individually and collectively. I especially liked the pipeline discussion because I was a master cataloger once upon a time, and I could catalog really well. But then I had to start supervising people. And cataloging and supervision are not the same, right? And then you have to direct something. Cataloging, supervision, and direction, being a director are not the same thing. So I can easily understand that pipeline metaphor. And then we had 4 panelists who embodied leadership, thank you very much, Karen. Whether or not they admitted it, I certainly saw them embodying leadership. And they talked about their organizations and again raised this question of when does individual leadership morph into collective leadership? And Courtney, thank you very much for challenging us to provide leadership opportunities and also for emphasizing the need to create and nurture and retain a diverse workforce. I also am very touched by what you say about the everyday leadership that librarians provide. And I'm sure if we took a few minutes to reflect quietly and then share back to the large group, we could all think of a few examples. I challenge you just to think of 3. Mental notes to yourself. I'm sure you can think of 3 ways in which you have been a leader. So those are just a few of my thoughts as the day has gone on, and it's been a great day. So I invite you to talk with us a little more. Get up, stretch, 2 microphones, and share with us your takeaways from the day. What ideas and concepts will you implement in your own context? What are you going to discuss with your colleagues, supervisors, and supervisees? Anyone who wasn't able to come here, what are you going to take back? So I invite your thoughts, and most of the group is still here, so we're going to have a great conversation. And you'll be walking to the microphones, and you'll be sharing your thoughts with us. And you'll be smiling when you disagree. Great, so we've got someone over here on the right.
Hi, my name is Paul Glassman. I'm from Felician College in Bergen County. I'm very intrigued by the idea of the BHAG, and my question centers on that. Have you ever committed to the big idea? And I love that connection. It makes me think of Daniel Burnham's overused phrase, make no little plans. Have you ever made big plans and committed to the big idea and then realized at a certain point that you can't achieve it? And if so, what do you do at that point?
Do we have people here who would like to share that experience?
I have a big plant, but it hasn't. I have a big plant that I didn't talk about because it's not at a time to be spoken of. So I don't know yet if it's going to fail or not. But I'm hoping it won't.
I can. Whoops, is this on?
Yeah.
Hello? I can think of a number of, now I've been a librarian for about 20 years now, so I've been around long enough to have launched many things that I've then had to kill at the end. Because, we have a life cycle for our projects and life cycle for our tools and our services, and there's a time for them, and then there's a time to say goodbye. And I have, it's with great remorse that I have done, sadness, but I feel like that is part of my job. It's like I plant a lot of flowers, and then some I have to take out sometime, and so dear things. I'm picturing one dear thing that really put my heart and soul into, that had my fingerprints all over it, and then I left that area, and we buried it, even though it was tremendously popular. And it was just, we have to make such difficult decisions now about where we put our resources and our time. And I call it killing puppies. Oh my goodness. Because we have a lot of puppies.
I think the pastor better step in right now.
Should I just stop there? You probably know what I mean, I guess. Was that on tape? Somebody else go quick.
But don't you think that part of being a leader is recognizing when it is time to pull the plug on something? I think that it's altogether too prevalent that people just, they've committed to something and they feel like they have to just keep on committing to it long after everybody understands that it's not working anymore. So really, it's an impressive thing to be able to kill that puppy when that puppy needs to be put down.
Well, thank you. I will not call the ASPCA.
I think I better add a couple words there. We don't want to end on that metaphor. So again, I'm thinking back to what Bob said this morning about the importance of the mystery component, and that you really don't always know where you're going, and that thing may change and evolve. And I would also say, for me, what's often the most important is the process, not the product. So it's not that we got to what we said we were going to, where we said we were going to go, or we produced what we said we were going to produce, but it's that growth and development that happened along the way. How's that? Is that better than the other? Okay. Good. See, this theological education pays off every day. Over here on the left.
So we'll take it in a whole other direction now after the death of small pets. I'm Ann Langley from Princeton University, and I really like, this is probably more of a comment or maybe something for people to think about, but I really like the theme that has kind of been overarching over the whole day that hasn't necessarily been explicitly spoken about, but it's about becoming a leader, but then how leaders inspire new leaders. And I think the word that was missing that I kept wanting to hear people talk about was the need to trust people, to be in charge of their own leadership. And you can lead people, but then at some point you have to step away and trust that they're going to go off and become a butterfly. And so there's that trust issue that I think is really important part of the process. So thank you so much.
The other thing that I was thinking about in terms of a question that I didn't ask that I think is equally important is how are you receptive to leadership, or how are you receptive to mentorship? And so I think just as much as we've talked about what does it take to be a leader and what is good practice in leading, it's just as important to sort of understand how to follow and how to be mentored. And so I think that could probably be another full day of conversations, but as people take away from this and think about it, that piece of it should be a part of the takeaway, I think.
There was something that, you can hear me, that Elliot mentioned earlier about, these not being life or death, decisions that are being made, which, I jotted down. Well, then if every decision isn't a life or death, situation, then, having more opportunities for leadership could be low risk and high reward. So there is that trust element, and that, what's the worst that someone could really screw something up, and let's trust that they're going to do the right thing because I'm putting them in the situation to do the right thing. And hey, everyone lives, and the puppies live, and we're okay. So that's a really good point.
I just also want to I just have to add to that, because as somebody who's done a lot of leading too, sometimes I think the focus needs to be on the person, not the thing. And we put the focus often too much on the thing. So when I give an assignment to somebody, and I know it's a stretch assignment, it's for them. It's not so much for the outcome or the product that they're going to create. It's to help them along their developmental path. To help coach them. It's an opportunity for growth. So again, back to that growth mindset. If you see everything as opportunity for growth, then you're more I think it's more productive to focus on the growth than it is necessarily on the tool, the outcome, the thing, the product that they're creating.
And for anyone who's been building a bibliography during this event, in my board work, there's a book that's been influential called The Will to Govern Well, and it has in its subtitle, Trust, Knowledge, and Nimbleness, I think. And trust as a board has become very important, and trust between the board and the chief executive officer is very important as well. On the right.
Can you hear me? First, I'd like to say that the Columbia University Libraries does not endorse killing of any pets.
I'm never going to live this down. No mammals.
No, I would like actually your comments on, because what I've seen is sometimes for people, especially that are new to organizations or new to their career, being less bold than they should be about confronting libraries or library leadership, or even people that are out there that they could be learning from, to actually be pretty forward in asking for assistance to mentorship or having real conversations about that. And wondered if you could reflect on that, about your experience in it, and maybe let us know, have you been bold in that and actually asking something from your organization or the people that you see in your organizations that could be of assistance?
I just did an exercise where I asked 25 people what they thought my 3 best qualities were, and it was part of a development thing I'm doing. And I was really surprised by the responses, and one of the things that was pretty consistent was some comment that had to do with my persistence, my perseverance. And I think that is a quality that has served me so well. There was somebody here who talked about, the 30-year project that she started to nurture that didn't come to fruition. That's my life. That is like my career right there. I mean, I have to have the long view, because it takes us a long time, and things aren't always right at the right time. So much of what I try to do is just about timing. And then it's also about revealing the reason, communicating the reason over and over again. So, this is kind of taking me off topic, but I have to say that the best tool I have in my toolkit is an arsenal of needs assessment tools. So, focus groups, surveys, discussions, all of those things are just ripe to help me create a case for doing something new. So I would have loved to, I didn't have a chance to talk about how all this library leadership developed, how this all developed, what were the seeds that I planted or that other people planted that was able to create such a robust program. And I didn't talk about it because it's so different. Everybody has different seeds. I think the gift that you have to that's good to have is the ability to see, that's a seed. Oh, that's a seed. Oh, look at that. And then you create a story that sounds very compelling. That builds a story for, well, why should I? I've had 5 jobs at Minnesota, and each one I've invented and talked people into funding me for. I would love to teach people how to do that. I don't know, this again, often we all have strengths that we don't even know, it's like no big deal because it's just easy to you, and you all have those. Well, that's just one of mine. It's the kind of thing where it's like, God, I wish I could just put together a training program for that. Maybe someday I'll figure that out. But I think that's exactly the quality that we need in libraries, and I've completely gone off track from what you said, Damon. But do you want to follow up with that, or you want me to comment? You and me both, babe. Anybody else want to comment?
You know, I do. I actually, this is an interesting question to me because a few years ago, I applied to go to the Harvard Leadership Program. And I have no desire to be a director or a UL or a president I have no desire to go beyond maybe even the second step of that pipeline. But I felt that there was an important role for, the soldiers in the organization to also understand how leadership can benefit the entire organism that they're part of. And it didn't work out, and I think that it didn't work out that I was able to go. I mean, not that it didn't work out that I went. But I feel like there is an emphasis on sending folks to these big leadership or training programs only if they are on that pipeline track. And I think there is a place for folks who want to lead from behind to a certain extent to have that same sort of leadership training.
Yeah, I'd like to kind of inspired by that too, thinking about how, for me, leadership, it's going to be a while before I'm going to be practically in a position to want to be in a more supervisory role, to be a chief librarian someday, or I do have aspirations to do that at some point, but right now there's a lot of things I want to do at Burke long before I start doing that. But there's a lot of leadership to be done in committees and projects, and I think that's where leadership always gets conflated with being a supervisor and being in charge of people, but it really is about as much inspiring people and leading a group of people together, whether you're really officially in charge or like where I am, where it's very flat, but you can rally the troops to work on a project and get everyone to buy in and come to some consensus on some ideas. So I think that's where it's, especially at libraries where there are a lot of people that don't have aspirations to move up, or there just aren't those opportunities, to find ways to develop that kind of leadership among the lower level staff is really helpful.
And we have a question on the left.
Hi, Tom Nielsen at Metro. I just wanted to offer that when I'm not wearing my Metro hat, I'm the past chair of the solo division at SLA. And I put together a webinar series for them, and we just had our first webinar, and it was Everyday Leadership for special and solo librarians. And Pat Wagner led that webinar. And she gave everybody at the end 3 assignments to do, and they were find a mentor, ask for feedback from someone you respect, and ask a politically savvy person what you should be doing differently. And I just wanted to ask about the second one, about talking to someone about things that you do that you may find critical of yourself. So trusting somebody that you know to say to you, what do you think I should be doing differently or behaving differently or acting differently that I may not be aware of? That's kind of one of the things that I think is part of leadership. And I'd be interested to hear what you have to say.
I think there's a step that has to happen before that, and that is to set down some ground rules about how that feedback is given and how it's going to be received. So I'm teaching a class right now called Writing for Chemists, and the way that we've set up the class is it's a workshop, and so we spend about 45 minutes each class workshopping a piece of writing, 5 to 10 pages, that one of the students has written. And we spent a good 45 minutes or an hour in one of the early classes laying down what the ground rules were that everybody could agree upon, that we could then, document that, have that as sort of a recourse as people are giving feedback to remind them about best practices. And I was saying this to somebody during lunch. for me, that comes from an art background, where in that case, we're talking about the writing, we're not talking about the person. And so what you bring up is a really interesting question, that when you are talking about the person, how does that change? But I think there's a lot that can be done with language. There's a lot that can be done about my perception of something, as opposed to saying you are doing it this way, where you actually end up making it about yourself, or it's about the person who's giving feedback. It's not as much about the person who's getting the feedback. And so I think if you can set down some ground rules, and I'm sure there's literature out there about how to do this, and Beth can probably counsel you through how to do this if you need guidance in that way. But I think that should happen before you actually get to the feedback stage. It's just my 2 cents.
I think it's really important to kind of tease out exactly what that person is looking for too, because they can say, oh, can you tell me, what I need to do better? But I think it's important to look at, okay, when is this conversation happening? Is it happening when you're doing your performance review with them this year? And so really the translation is, what can I do so that I can get an excellent, or an outstanding on my performance review? Or is it, what can I do, kind of, somebody referred to earlier today as in that whole personality camp, what kinds of softer skills, I guess, is the phrase I'm looking for, to improve, or what kind of technical skills do I need to improve in my job? So I think it's really important to not just take that question at face value, but to tease out what that individual is really looking for when they ask for feedback.
I think there are 2 pieces to it. First of all, we come back again to this whole notion of trust, and that trust needs to be inherent in that relationship in order for you to have that dialogue in terms of whatever is agreed upon. Sort of putting on my reference librarian hat, you've got to have a reference interview about it. You need to really get a sense of what it is that the person is looking for. And I think that the person who's in the mentoring role also needs to think about whether or not they're the appropriate person to provide the advice that the person wants. Because really, what you may not necessarily need to do is say, Courtney, you talk with your hands too much and you really should work on that. Maybe that person isn't the right, maybe Damon, because he's sitting right in front of me, maybe he's not the right person to give me that advice. He may say, I'm glad that you asked me, I'm going to be happy to work with you, but I know from experience that having more than one mentor is really important. Mm-hmm. And so, with your permission, I'd like to introduce you, in person via email, Google Hangout, whatever, to Star, so that, because Star has other strengths that I don't have, and there are things that she might be able to work with you on that that may be more appropriate, that she'll have a way of framing her way of talking about, saying, we have a lot in common. We both like to talk with our hands, like to do this. One of the things that someone advised me, and it was funny because I don't really know them very well, so I'm not. This is really hypothetical. I don't know. Maybe it's not hypothetical. But and she might have a way of framing it and talking to me about it that would make me say, oh yeah, in certain situations, it may make sense for me not to talk with my hands so much. But if Damon said it to me, I might be like, wow, I can't believe he threw me under the bus that way. Wow, I can't. Wow, he's really looking at me very critically. So I think that those building relationships, the recognition that getting a mentor doesn't mean having that one person. It means having multiple people. It means recognizing the power that you have when you're in that role and how you can help that person. And helping that person might be also finding someone else to have certain types of conversations and bring certain strengths to mentoring.
And that includes peer mentors. I think
Absolutely.
That's another thing. That when I
Absolutely.
first started, I was very lucky to be set up with peer mentors. So it wasn't an above or below situation, but it was somebody who had been around the organization longer and could start to give me some insight into the way that things worked, or how to get feedback. And so that was equally helpful.
I feel like I just want to jump in and say, talk about a little about my distinction between coaching and mentoring just for a second, because a lot of times when we talk about mentoring, coaching, we talk about them interchangeably. Is this mic on?
Yeah.
Okay. To me and to us where I work, mentoring is a relationship where somebody gives advice to somebody else. Here's my issue. What do you think? Well, here's what I would do if I were in that position. That's a mentoring relationship, and that's perfectly valid and good. The coaching relationship is a bit different. So if you're meeting with a peer coach, my job as your peer coach isn't to give you advice. My job as a coach is to say, well, boy, have you ever had that experience before? What did you do that worked? What didn't work? What can you do maybe differently this time or better this time? So as a coach, I ask a lot of questions, and I let the person sort through what works for them and what doesn't work for them. As a mentor, I give advice. I direct people. I encourage them. It is a different relationship for me. So when I talk about, and I just realized as you were talking, I didn't ever really define that when I talked about the peer coaching programs that we run. It really is a different animal than mentoring. So we are launching an official mentoring program. We've always had informal mentoring, but a more formal mentoring program that will sit side by side by the coaching program. They do different things.
And I think we have time for one more, and we have one more person at the microphone, so it
I'm
works out
sorry,
just right.
this is my third time, and I'm usually not this vocal, but there's just so much meat here that's, material here that is just amazing, and I love the buzz that I always get when I come to Columbia. I think that it's very important for us, as we're summing up, to remember that this question is being asked in a milieu that is much larger than simply the library world or the leadership world. And as someone who does a lot of mentoring and some coaching, I read extensively about work readiness and also about the changing scenery and education, both higher education and what comes before that, including core curriculums and so forth. And I think that one thing that all around is being talked about is the lack of work readiness of graduates from high schools, from colleges, from grad schools, and what can be done to bridge this gap. So I think it's excellent that we as librarians who are sitting in a seat of power somewhat to understand that we have a tremendous amount of influence, as Courtney brought out, particularly as it comes to trying to get, and I think also, I'm sorry, the woman in the middle, yes, Kitty, is it? Yes, who is doing a hybrid. This is what we have to do more. We've talked about embedded librarianships in previous symposiums and places, but I think what conclusions must be is that we have to create a future. And Peter Trucker talks about this, and other forward-thinking people, that the passive is good in some cases, but I think for leadership, it's just simply expressing ourselves and trying things out with people whom you can identify with. But to let this situation go is only going to exacerbate an already bad situation. And I think the economic situation certainly has contributed to it. The cost of higher education, the values of a diploma against positions of employment. But all of this is something that has been gone through before. Life is cyclical, and I think that if people take to heart the good things that have been said here, I think that people can go forward. The worst thing is to leave a symposium where you're filled with inspiration and then not do anything. So I'm hoping that this conversation will be continued, and perhaps there'll be a wiki or some sort of blog where people can contribute. Mentioned building a bibliography. Maybe when people go home, they'll think of further sources and share those things. Because I really enjoyed this symposium over some of the others that I have attended. It's really been spectacular. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. I think you've done my wrap-up. I don't have to do the wrap-up. Yes, I do. So first, again, join me in thanking all of our speakers for today. And can I just ask that the planning committee and volunteers and our wonderful MC stand up for a thank you? And we, of course, thank our sponsors, but we especially thank you for taking the time to come here and spend a day with us. Some of you traveled a few blocks, some a few miles, some many miles. So thank you. This event has been successful because of you. And to assess the success of the event, you know what's coming, right? I've been asked to say, in a few days, you will receive an email providing you with a link to a survey. And when you receive the email, please take yet another few more minutes. You've already invested a lot of time, so a few more minutes is nothing, to respond to this survey, because your feedback will provide us with essential information about future symposium planning. So thank you again for attending and for participating in the survey and for the wonderful, thoughtful conversation.